Welcome to Short Course, episode 130 for June 20th, 2024. I'm your host, Ben Barry. As I mentioned on the last episode of the podcast 5 or so weeks ago, Stephanie, my wife, who's also the North Carolina section coordinator and the wizard behind the scenes helping to make the Area 6 match happen, her mother had a very serious stroke that's left her almost completely disabled, and that has ended up impacting our lives in the sense of, well, for a while there, we were very concerned about the care she was getting at the skilled nursing facility she was at. We had her discharged from there, and she spent 9 days at our house where we were giving her the around-the-clock care that she needed, and now she is back in a better facility, and that has proven to be something of a relief. But as you can imagine, dealing with that has preempted quite a lot of things. This podcast among them, but also basically everything shooting related. I've been keeping up with USPSA business on the board, attending board meetings as best I can, but not really able to make a lot of headway there. But as I mentioned, she is back in a facility where she's getting better care now, and that has given Stephanie and myself a chance to catch up in a flurry of activity on a number of things, much of it related to the Area 6 match, as well as USPSA board business. Also, for everybody who doesn't know, we have two kids, a 3.5-year-old girl and a son that just turned a year old. And it was funny, we were actually just comparing the dates, and it was in August of 2022 that I reached my breaking point and put my name in to run for Area 6 director. And it was not until a few weeks later that we found out that Stephanie was pregnant. So this whole Area 6 director campaign has been around longer than my son, who just turned a year old, which is weird to think, but here we are. That said, because we were able to have the help of this other facility, the family and I were able to get out of town for the weekend and spend a few days up in a cabin in the mountains. And I spent 3 of the 4 days that we were there just heads down working on USPSA business, either, like I said, Area 6 work or catching up on board business. The 4th day that we spent there, we actually did end up going into town in the mountains of North Carolina into the town of Brevard, which, if you're ever there, is a lovely little mountain small town, and they have a Veterans History Museum that is just, it's awesome. Very small, but it's just room after room full of just cases of historical items and artifacts and vet bringbacks. And they've got, postage stamps and guns and all kinds of artifacts, but for being a small, completely volunteer run collection, it was definitely worth the hour and a half that we were able to spend there before the kids got too antsy. But if you're ever in Brevard, worth checking out. But all of that to say that this has definitely been a period of setbacks and then catching up. And I do feel like for the first time in quite a while, things are sort of organized, prioritized. When I have time to work on USPSA business, I know where to start, and I'm getting caught back up on everything and folks that have been waiting on me for things. So that's all good news. The Area 6 match is on track. We have plenty of staff. The Saturday, Sunday slots are all full. Friday is, I think, about half full. So if you want to shoot and you want to shoot 12 stages in one day, staff reset, that option is still there on Friday. And yeah, all the final details are starting to come together. But I did want to take the opportunity to back up a bit, since this is the first time I'm recording a podcast since I traveled to the Alabama section match about a month ago in the 3rd week of May. Now, for context, the Alabama section match is not a match I had shot before, nor one that I probably would have traveled to on my own outside of being a member of the board and representing everyone in Area 6 all the way from North Carolina down to Florida over to Mississippi. Historically, I always shoot and work the North Carolina section. I'll typically shoot the South Carolina section. I went over and I worked the Georgia section once a few years ago, but I typically have not been one to travel around and shoot a huge number of matches. Last year, I drove up and shot the Kentucky Bluegrass low cap match because that seemed like a match that was doing things that I wanted to support. It was taking things in a direction that I thought was positive, and so I wanted to be a part of that. I've not shot a nationals since 2021, I believe, and that was mostly because I shot nationals a few times and I just found myself being consistently disappointed with them. And so that was part of when I focused more on trying to make local matches as best I could, trying to set the example, in ways that I could help the North Carolina section match, and now obviously the Area 6 match. And so I've never been one to travel extensively around the area. I have gone down to Florida a few times when they've had various IPSC matches, whether it's the IPSC Nationals or at the time it was the Extreme Pan American IPSC match, which I believe there was some discussion with IPSC about the fact that was a confusing name conflict with the actual Pan American Continental Championship. And so this year it's just the Extreme USA Open or Extreme USA match, whatever they're calling it. So those are typically, there's one big match like that a year that I'll go to. It used to be USPSA Nationals, then IPSC Nationals a few times, and then the Extreme match once. So all of this to say that without a doubt, the Alabama section match is not a match that I would have gone to were I not the Area 6 director. Now, that's not a slight against the Alabama section match. I don't tend to get out and shoot that many big matches outside of 4 or 5 hours away from home. But when I came in as the Area 6 director, I was very aware of that fact. I was aware of the fact that I knew a lot of the folks in North Carolina because I come and I see them at the section match, especially when the Area 6 match was here in North Carolina. A lot of North Carolina folks worked it. I had a lot of contact with South Carolina folks from going to shoot that match in Georgia and Florida, but anywhere much west of that, and I didn't have a lot of exposure. I did have the interesting and fun experience of being squatted with a bunch of the Alabama guys at Area 6 last year. And so I got to talk to a number of them. And actually, I think there were something like 3 or 4 section coordinators on that one squad, just out of strange coincidence. Well, they were all shooting together. It was just a coincidence that I ended up getting squatted with them. But it was a good experience. And so when I was starting my term, when I knew that I was coming in, I thought that it would be good to try and travel around and shoot as many section matches within Area 6 as I could, because I was already not planning to go to nationals. And I thought if I'm going to travel, it should be to make more contacts with the folks in Area 6 rather than traveling to a national championship where a lot of the folks won't necessarily be Area 6 folks. And so the Alabama section was a natural choice for a few reasons. One, it was relatively early in the year. And second, it's kind of right in the middle of the other half of Area 6. So, if you kind of draw a line down, the Tennessee, North Carolina border down to Georgia and Alabama, it sort of is the middle of the other side. And the sort of decision making going into this was in January and February. Middle of February is when I actually booked the flight and the hotel and the rental car, which, if you remember, January was the board meeting where they tried to remove Frank. We were able to get him back. And then in February, we weren't sure if, they were going to find some way to remove me. And so January and February of the year were a pretty turbulent time. But middle of February, when it looked like, okay, Frank's here to stay, that was after Mel had resigned, after Bruce Gary and Sherwin said they weren't going to come back as interim directors. It seemed like, okay, things are headed in the right direction. I'm actually, it's time to put money down on this trip, because it looks like I'm actually going to be the area director in May still, which was not entirely obvious in January. And so I basically planned 2 of these trips with the goal of being present and trying to interact with more folks at section matches in Area 6 than I normally would just shooting in my local area. The first was the South Carolina section, which typically I do shoot every year, but this year, as a combination of Area 6 match planning, because we're hosting Area 6 at that same club, Belton Gun Club in upstate South Carolina, and to try and interact with staff and shooters more, Steph and I drove down together, and at the time, her mom was generously able to watch both of our kids and our dogs. And so we were able to just leave town for 4 days and just the two of us come to the match. So we were there on staff day when the staff were shooting, and then for the whole main match. And I ended up shooting on Sunday, which was the last day of the match. But my goal was to be there and be able to interact with the staff and the competitors on Saturday and just get a chance to talk to folks. And so that was kind of the first experiment. And then this trip to Alabama was the second experiment. And I definitely will say the experiments were not entirely unsuccessful, in the sense that there was certainly no shortage of folks to talk to. I had a great time talking to a number of people that I'd never met, introducing myself, and just getting to hear different perspectives. It's also hard to know, but the goal of just being present and being seen out talking to folks and soliciting feedback, my hope is not just that people would have that chance physically on the range to talk to me, because as I'll get to a little bit later, that ended up being, I think, the main downside to this approach, but to sort of just be approachable. And hopefully folks, if you're a listener to this podcast, my email address, but anybody who saw me at that match or talked to somebody who saw me at that match would feel like they could actually reach out to me and have their concerns addressed. So even if it was something where we weren't able to discuss the exact topic on the range, the goal was to be present, build rapport, and put myself out there so people felt like I was approachable and someone they could actually raise their concerns with and feel heard. So, like I said, I ended up doing that at South Carolina, and then I'd committed with buying the hotel and the plane ticket and the rental car to do this in Alabama as well this past week. And I will definitely say I enjoyed the experience. The match was great. It was well run. I appreciated all the time that I spent on the range. Getting to the range was a pain in the neck. Getting back from the range was an even bigger pain in the neck. So because of the way the scheduling worked, my itinerary was to fly out on the last flight on Thursday night and then fly back on the last flight home Saturday night, which is not something I'd done before, but it basically means you are the recipient of any delays that have happened anywhere else in the day. They all stack up. And so sure enough, Saturday night, we ended up getting in late, which had all kinds of issues. The flights were delayed. They actually called me or messaged me Thursday when I was supposed to fly out. And they said, "Oh, we've rebooked you on a flight in the morning." And I was like, "No, I need to be at the range at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning." So they were able to rebook me on something else that night. But the whole thing was just a disaster. The flight back, I ended up missing my connection in Charlotte and getting to spend the night Saturday night in the airport. So, if anybody ever tries to tell you that board travel is glamorous and exciting and relaxing and a free vacation, out of my limited sample set, that is not the case. So it was, for how long it took, it probably actually would have been shorter for me just to drive. It's only a 9-hour drive from Raleigh to Huntsville, but it seemed like, just sit out on an airplane, flying with guns, no big deal. And that part actually wasn't a big deal. The guns part of it was no issue. But yeah, just anytime you're catching a connecting flight when you're not going that far, it was not good. But the trip on net, I'm glad that I did it. I'm glad I tried the experiment. I don't think I'll be doing it again because, kind of as I mentioned earlier, the main limit that I found, well, there are really two things. One is just the fact that having a conversation and actually trying to get into something into a meaningful topic and understand someone's perspective, it takes time. And I tried to talk to as many folks as I could, but it's just, you can only have so many 15-minute conversations in an hour. And the flip side of that is that also, while the match is going on at South Carolina, there was the benefit that it was a staff reset match. So competitors, after they had shot a stage, didn't really have anything to be doing. So I was able to talk to them a little more freely. But at Alabama, being a conventional competitor reset match, if I was talking to some competitor for 10 minutes while their squad was shooting a stage, well, I'm taking one person away from helping to reset the stage. And so, I did try and jump around, and when I saw squads waiting on a stage or when I saw an empty stage, I'd go over and talk to the staff. And so there were some ways that I could kind of adjust that. But at the end of the day, in terms of trying to be in a position to engage people and actually have sort of substantial conversations, it was certainly better than nothing, but it left a lot to be desired as well. And at the end of the day, I really do just want to have everybody out there listening and in Area 6 and elsewhere just know, hey, you've got my email. If you want to talk about something, shoot me an email. If it's something where we need to get on the phone and hash it out, that's, again, a phone call is easier than flying to Alabama or driving to Belton. So I don't have unlimited time for phone calls, but I do, especially once the kids are in bed, I do have the bandwidth to talk to folks if there's something of substance to go over. And so it was one of those things where, coming into being the Area 6 director, my predecessor was known for working a lot of matches, and I didn't necessarily want to take that approach, because when you're holding a timer or a tablet, you're in this position of authority over people, so they aren't necessarily going to talk to you in the same way. Whereas if you're just a fellow shooter just walking around, it's easier to kind of have that conversation. And B, you just don't have the time to talk to folks. You're trying to run a squad. And so then if you stand off to the side and talk to folks, in fact, so in Alabama, I shot with the staff on Friday and then walked around on Saturday during the main match. And at one point I did end up, while during the staff match, I did end up getting kind of pulled into a side conversation with a guy that was walking stages who was shooting on Saturday. And I talked to him for a good 10 minutes, and I got a good natured rebuke from the squad about my lack of helpfulness in that time, which was entirely well earned. I didn't know how long, if I'd get a chance to talk to this guy very much. So I wanted to make the most of the time I had, but while I was doing that, my squad was noticing that I was not helping. And so it was an interesting tension. And so that's why I say, I think both the experiment in South Carolina and then traveling to the Alabama match, I'm happy that I tried them, but I think the model needs further tweaking. I wouldn't repeat those experiences exactly as they were again. But that's all I can really promise as an area director, is I'm going to try and do stuff differently. It's not all going to work. I mean, you're going to see some of that with the Area 6 match. We're doing stuff differently. It's not all going to work, but I think if you just keep doing the same old, things never get better. And so all I can really promise is I'll try new stuff. I'll be honest when it's not a success, and I won't blow smoke up your butt about it. And so you'll see when the reports are live. In fact, you can already see on Area 6 USPSA.org. You can see the items that I plan to expense to USPSA, and I'll be filing that in the next few days. But it was definitely an expensive trip, especially going to Huntsville. Now, the policy that was set, according to the document, it was last updated in September of 2022, and it's marked as the 22-23 travel and expense reimbursement policy. So this has been on the books for a few years now. The policy that was spelled out is that basically area directors have all of their travel to nationals, all of their travel to their area match, and $6,000 additional on top of the first two for traveling around their area. And for one thing, I will say the Area 6 match will not be all of my expenses to travel to work the Area 6 match and the hotel and all that'll be coming out of the Area 6 match budget. So that's an entire, of those three things that are allocated to area directors, I won't be using the one to go to nationals, and I won't be using the one to go to my own area match, because my own area match is funding that. So of those three, only one of them, the 6,000, am I actually using any of, and I'll have to look at the number, but it'll end up being somewhere around 1,500 total, I think, that I'll actually end up expensing towards that for this year. Now, all of that said, how was the match? Match was great. I thought it was really well run. It was really, there was just something about it. You could tell a lot of folks were invested in it. A lot of folks took pride in it. There were a lot of folks who were local, where this was their home club, or they're Alabama residents. There was just a real sense that this was just a match put on as a labor of love. And I don't mean that as a backhanded compliment that it was, some kind of low budget thing. It wasn't. It was really thoughtfully put together, and the production value was really high. The staff, the stages, the organization, everybody was aligned. They were trying to make sure everybody had a good experience. And like I said, I ended up shooting on Friday with the staff, and it's this is kind of a weird thing to say, but that's probably the most fun that I've had shooting in a long time. It's been a while since I've shot a match with just a squad of guys, and none of them knew me from Adam. I'd never shot a match with any of them before, and they were happy just to have another guy there. I was helping out as much as I could, and we all passed the timer around and everything, and it was a really good experience. It's the kind of thing where it's the opposite of kind of what I talked about before, where I had gone to nationals for a few years after. Well, I went to the 2017 nationals in St. George, and that one was really well done. And then I think it was 2018 was 9 days of nationals. That one was kind of underwhelming. 2019 was underwhelming, and then after that I just kind of started to feel like it wasn't worth it. Whereas for whatever reason, this Alabama match, it really, I left really feeling like it was a good experience. And I think, like I said, I think it really shows the passion of everybody involved. And it's just a good reminder of what a match can be when people feel like they have skin in the game. They feel like they have some pride in putting on a really high quality experience. And I hope that we can take that spirit of not just doing something because the rulebook says you have to do it, or doing something because you're told to, but really trying to make something the best it can be, and continue to scale that up, bring that sense of volunteerism up to higher and higher levels. Obviously, involving as many folks as we can in making the Area 6 match the best it can be, and then obviously taking that and bringing it to nationals, which I will be very interested to hear and see how nationals goes. It's definitely being run in a different way this year, with Yimin Lin as the president and match director, Todd Holmes, who is the South Carolina section coordinator, the SCSC, as well as the president at Belton Gun Club, and generally does just an incredible amount of stuff for the sport. And obviously I'm talking to him fairly regularly with regards to the Area 6 match. So he's been involved with nationals as well, and I'm hearing good things. I'm really looking forward to, hopefully it'll be a good experience for folks. Same thing there. A lot of things being done differently, trying to do things better. It never goes perfect the first time you do it, but I really am optimistic that this is setting us on a path for improvement, not just kind of doing the same thing that's always been done. As far as things sort of in USPSA at large, so there was we did have a board meeting that was scheduled. We've been meeting twice a month, and that was basically growing out of the fact that in January and then February and then March, we ended up having to have multiple 4+ hour meetings. And so we just adapted to that and scheduled and said, okay, for the time being, we're just going to meet every 2 weeks. And that just gives us more frequent check-ins to resolve issues. And especially now that we are without a managing director, there are more issues that the board is having to personally meet to resolve. Some of it is just signing contracts, approving contracts, which, some of that we'd be doing even with a managing director, but there's a lot of that going on. And so going to this every 2 weeks meeting schedule, I think was good and has been good, and probably will continue for a little while. Not that we're doing any one particular thing, but just there are all of these issues that are coming up as there is so much influx at headquarters. But there was some discussion online about the fact that right before the Area 8 match a few weeks ago, that board meeting was canceled, putatively because everybody was traveling to the Area 8 match. But actually, it was just because there didn't happen to be any agenda items that week. So there have been other things, and each week, each meeting, there are things that either need to be resolved, contracts that need to be discussed, issues that have come up since the last meeting. And that meeting, there just weren't any agenda items that needed to be handled, and so we had agreed to skip that one. It wasn't that, at least that I saw from any of the discussions that I had that it was explicitly to make it easier for anybody to travel. It was just that particular week there was nothing to discuss. Now, that's not to say that nothing is happening. There are definitely things happening behind the scenes. So, as discussed, the managing director search is ongoing. There's resumes and interviews. There's stuff going on behind the scenes there actively. Hopefully we'll have something to announce, good news to announce sooner rather than later. But as a board, we are taking this in a sort of slow and steady approach. We certainly don't want to just take the first person who seems halfway qualified and throw them in the seat. We're trying to make sure we're looking through all the resumes we're getting and picking someone qualified. And the finances are getting a little bit better each month. This month, we actually got the May end of month financials for May on the 12th of June is when our contract accountant sent them over. So we're getting a better picture of what was actually spent in the month closer to when the month ends. And crucially, now that we have approved the 2024 budget, that package of, it was a spreadsheet with 8 or 10 tabs, but that financial package also had a spreadsheet that just charted month by month the actual versus budgeted spend. And so that is really giving us a lot of leverage to start seeing, okay, where are the areas that were either under budget? So did we misestimate this? Is there going to be money to be spent later in the year? Or are we over budget? And how can we figure that out in the 5th or 6th month of the year instead of waiting until the year's over, tallying everything up and just seeing, oh, I guess we broke the budget on this one. So from everything that I've seen, having come into the board of what the board was getting before I was here, and then everything since I've been on the board, that spreadsheet that we got on the 12th of June was unprecedented in the sense that it had actuals versus budget broken down by month so that we can start tracking and fixing things before we get too far off track with a lot of these budgets. And, the budget's spent by August and then you're just running a deficit the rest of the year. Hopefully we can get out ahead of as many of those as possible. And, there are a number of other things going on in terms of trying to make sure things are being coded correctly. Is Nationals travel being put against the Nationals budget or against the catch-all travel budget, those kinds of things. But there's definitely progress happening. It is not visible outside the board, but we are definitely getting better information. The resources are coming together. We're getting better facts to make decisions based on, basically. And so in this case, it is one of those no news is good news type things. Nothing big is happening, but I think good things are coming, and that's all I can really say for now. And then I'll just finish up with a few election notes. So the Area 4 special election. So this was an election to replace Mel Rodero, who resigned earlier this year as Area 4 director because there was more than 2 years on his term. A special election was held to replace him. There were 3 people in the election, and the way USPSA elections work, if nobody gets more than 50% of the vote, then it goes to a runoff. But in this case, it was announced this past Monday during the board meeting that Alex Acosta won the Area 4 election with more than 50% of the vote, so there will be no runoff, and we set his start date to be a week from Monday, which is the 24th. So a couple days after you hear this, Alex Acosta will be the new Area 4 director for the rest of this year through the end of 2026, I believe. Because, then there will be 2 more years after this year. So he'll be coming on board, and then the Area 2 and Area 5 elections, so they started June 15th. So as I'm recording this, they started last week. Statistically, most of you have already voted if you're going to vote, but if you haven't yet, so Area 2 is Arizona, California, Colorado, Hawaii, and New Mexico. And there are 2 candidates in that one, John Burt and Jim Adame. Since there's only 2 candidates, it will not go to a runoff, so we will know the winner of that one July 17th, the day after the election closes. And then Area 5 is Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. And that is actually a 4-way election. So that one almost certainly is going to a runoff. The voting will end July 16th. Once the runoff is declared, it'll be basically another 45 days until the runoff starts, and then the runoff will be a second 31-day voting period. So we'll know the winner of that one in early October. And like I said, I think most of you have probably already voted, but certainly in the Area 5 election, there are a number of folks who are very passionate about the sport, but from what I have seen and from my interactions with him, I think the guy that I keep wishing I had on the board so I could ask him questions and send him stuff is Chris St. Clair. He's worked with all kinds of big organizations and various hurdles and red tape and all this stuff before. He's handled budgets, he's wrangled boards and had to prepare presentations and all this, and everything that I've talked to in the conversations that I've had. He has a bit of an over the top persona. A lot of his social media stuff, he's like basically saying that USPSA is run by aliens and lizard people or whatever. It's in good nature, but when I talk to him in private, I've gotten very straightforward, reasonable ideas out of him, and so I will be happy to work with whoever ends up winning the election. But from my perspective, from my interactions, I've had really positive interactions with Chris, and so if you are in Area 5 and still on the fence, I would he would be the one I would vote for if I were voting in the election. Not to slight anyone else, but he's the one that I wish I had on the board to help me out as someone who very much recognizes my lack of experience for a lot of the tasks that we're being charged with. Having a guy like him would be a benefit to the board. Well, that wraps up this episode of Short Course. If you want to get in touch with me, my email is ben@berryshooting.com or area6@uspsa.org. Talk to you next time.